LG, Samsung, Hyundai. These brands are surely no strangers to you. They share a common
They're
trait.
all chaebols, which are large South Korean conglomerates that are usually run by one single family with total assets that exceed 5 trillion won.
In 2023, South Korea had approximately 80 such conglomerates. The top 10 among them contributed over 60% of the country's GDP.
Super rich. This is like rich, like can't be touched by law, control presidents type of rich.
Here, nothing can challenge their authority. For decades, chaebols have single-handedly manipulated South Korea's economy and controlled its political system from the shadows. But how do they do it? On December 5, 2014, at John F. Kennedy Airport in New York City, Korean Air Flight 086 was preparing to take off for Incheon, South Korea. Suddenly, the plane turned back to the gate. In the first-class cabin, angry shouts could be clearly heard. The voice belonged to Heather Cho, or Cho Hyun-ah in Korean, the daughter of Korean Air's chairman. Cho was furious because a flight attendant served her macadamia nuts in a paper bag instead of on a plate, as per the airline's service protocol. And so, Cho began to exert her power. She verbally abused and physically assaulted the chief flight attendant, forcing him to kneel and apologize in front of everyone. She ordered the plane to return to the gate and had the chief flight attendant removed. Delaying an international flight, publicly humiliating an individual, and abandoning an employee abroad over a bag of nuts is truly outrageous. Yet such behavior is far from rare among South Korea's elite tycoons. In 2018, Cho's younger sister threw a glass of water in a business partner's face during a meeting. In 2017, Kim Dong-seon, heir to the Hanwha conglomerate, was accused of assaulting a bartender and vandalizing a police car. The unethical behavior of this elite class is so widespread that it gave rise to a new term. Gapchil encompasses all forms of workplace abuse and bullying by those in positions of authority, from verbal degradation and unjust suppression of rights to physical assault and bodily harm. But where does this power come from? These tycoons don't merely act powerful, they are powerful. But where does this power come from? In the early 1950s, the Korean War left South Korea in complete devastation. The economy relied heavily on subsistence agriculture. The nation's only lifeline often came from external sources. During this period, U.S. aid at times accounted for up to 80% of the government's budget. These funds, approved by South Korea's first president, Syngman Rhee, were channeled to businesses for national reconstruction. It sounds promising, but digging into the details reveals Rhee's true intentions. The government subsidies were not aimed at economic development, but at consolidating Rhee's political power. In the end, South Korea remained unchanged, poor as ever. Rhee's political career ended with a coup. His successor was a general from the opposition, Park Chung-hee.
나는 군을 준수하고 국가를 보유하며.
Unlike his predecessor, Park had greater ambitions for the nation. Initially, Park planned to eliminate the businesses that had colluded with Rhee to destabilize the country. But his new plan required their cooperation. Export first. This was the first and most critical slogan.
자, 여러분 각자에게 특정 산업을 배정했습니다. 현대에게는 자동차 산업, 삼성과 럭키 금성통신에게는 전자 산업, 선경에게는 석유와 미디어 산업입니다. 5년 내 우리의 제품이 세계로 수출되고 우리는 빈곤에서 벗어나야 합니다.
However, for conglomerates to access the capital needed for business, they had to meet Park's expectations. These family-owned conglomerates, managed under state oversight, were given a name: chaebol. By providing cheap steel, subsidies, preferential loans, and numerous protective policies, Park enabled the chaebols to expand relentlessly. In 1960, South Korea's GDP was less than $4 billion. By 1979, it had surged to $70 billion, a tenfold increase. Exports also saw astonishing growth, rising from $55 million in 1962 to to $835 million in 1970, a 16-fold increase in less than a decade. In short, Park saved South Korea from economic collapse. However, this didn't secure him absolute power.
Dead. The new government announced that President Park was killed by a shot fired accidentally by the head of South Korea's Central Intelligence Agency.
Despite this, Park left a significant mark on the nation's history with many notable achievements. After Park's death, the chaebols were no longer restrained by the government. They grew increasingly powerful to the point of being uncontrollable. Their absolute economic dominance persists to this day. As of 2024, the revenue of South Korea's top 30 chaebols accounted for 77% of the nation's total GDP. In the same year, the top 500 companies in the United States contributed only 66% to US GDP. The consequences of this imbalance are greater than most people realize. First, chaebols hold nearly complete control over the markets they enter. This allows them to freely set the rules of the game. For example, after Hyundai acquired a majority stake in Kia, they controlled 70 to 80% of the domestic auto market. From there, they established stringent contract policies with material suppliers that were required to provide exclusively to Hyundai and Kia partners. Material suppliers were required to provide exclusively to Hyundai and Kia. Contract terms allowed the two conglomerates to review suppliers' cost structures to minimize input prices. Hyundai isn't alone. Samsung also requires technical disclosures as a prerequisite for partnerships. Lotte faced criticism for forcing suppliers to fund promotional programs at their own expense. From January to August 2024, 1,299 South Korean businesses filed for bankruptcy, the highest in a decade, with most being SMEs. However, economic dominance is only the tip of the iceberg. What makes chaebols truly formidable is how they manipulate the political system to perpetuate their power across generations. In some descriptions, South Korea is referred to as the Republic of Samsung. Year after year, 20% of South Korea's economy is controlled by a single conglomerate. Their only worthy rival is the South Korean government, with annual spending also around 20% of GDP. However, money doesn't tell the whole story. What we see on the screen is Samsung's complex business structure. When you buy a phone, you buy it from Samsung. When you purchase life insurance, you go to Samsung Life Insurance. When you board a ship, you're on one built by Samsung. When you visit a theme park, Samsung Everland welcomes you. A simple search reveals that Samsung's total value is approximately $400 billion. Meanwhile, the assets of its current chairman, Lee Jae-yong, amount to around $10 billion, roughly 2% of the conglomerate's value. How can Lee control this vast empire with just 2% of its value? Typically, to have absolute control over a company, one must own at least 51% of its shares. But in this case, there's another way. Imagine you're running a conglomerate. Its core business lies in Company A. Company A's shares are held by multiple investors, the largest being Company B. Company B's largest shareholder is Company C, and so on through companies X, Y, and Z. At the end is the company you directly control, valued at $500 million. You only need at least $251 million to control this company, and by extension, all the others in the chain. This strategy is called cross-shareholding. For decades, the Lee family has controlled Samsung this way, until
now, Samsung Electronics chairman Lee Kun-hee is recovering from his heart attack and is currently receiving hypothermia treatment in hospital.
Lee Kun-hee, the patriarch, was running out of time. You may not know, but South Korea has one of the world's highest inheritance taxes, around 50%. If Lee Kun-hee passed away, the family would owe an enormous tax bill to the government. To pay it, they might have to sell a significant portion of their direct shares in Samsung Electronics, the backbone company contributing 70 to 80% of the conglomerate's profits. Doing so would leave Lee Jae-yong with insufficient shares to control Samsung Electronics, let alone the entire Samsung empire. Lee needed a plan. Once again, he looked at Samsung's business network. After eliminating most non-essential business branches, Samsung Electronics essentially rested on two pillars: Samsung C&T and Samsung Cheil Industries. Unlike the discarded branches, these two companies were actively engaged in business and generated revenue. The problem was that, for years, the Lee family's control over Chaebol Industries was far stronger than their influence over C&T. Thus, they needed to inflate Chaebol Industries' valuation and drastically undervalue C&T. This way, with their shares in Chaebol combined with their remaining direct shares in Samsung Electronics, the Lee family could retain power. In theory, it was effective. In practice, such a deal would devalue C&T's stock. Nevertheless, they decided to proceed with the plan. One C&T share was converted to 0.35 Chaebol shares. Naturally, C&T shareholders couldn't accept their assets being so undervalued. Despite securing some votes through economic pressure from the Lee family, it wasn't enough. The biggest obstacle, holding a whopping 11.6% of Samsung C&T shares, remained unyielding. The National Pension Service, or NPS, managing the world's third-largest pension fund, held significant stakes in major conglomerates. The NPS is government-run, and the government was led by President Park Geun-hye at the time. In other words, if Lee could reach President Park, he could influence the NPS. However, dealing directly with the sitting president was too blatant. Fortunately, the Lee family had a back door.
President Park Geun-hye admitted that she has been maintaining close ties with Choi Soon-sil for an extended period of time.
Choi Soon-sil, one of Park's closest confidants, held no official government position, but directly chose Park's outfits, edited her speeches, and made policy recommendations. More importantly, Choi managed two non-profit foundations she had established. $36 million from the Lee family poured directly into Choi's foundations. And as expected, Choi exerted influence on President Park. In 2015, the National Pension Service approved the merger between C&T and Chaebol Industries. The Lee family successfully transferred power to the next generation. But beyond the $36 million, there was another price to pay. On February 17, 2017, Lee Jae-young was arrested on charges including bribery, embezzlement, and illegal overseas asset transfers. 6 months later, the initial trial sentenced him to 5 years in prison. The court concluded that Samsung had funded the Mir and K Sports Foundations in exchange for Park Geun-hye's support in the merger. For the outraged public, their fight wasn't just against the Lee family or the chaebols. It was against the corruption of the entire political system. In South Korea, there's something called the curse of Cheongwari, implying that every South Korean president meets a tragic end. There's no mystery here. Since South Korea became a democracy, every president has been swayed by chaebols in one way or another. This creates an unbreakable cycle. In fact, the first chaebol regulations were introduced in the 1986 Monopoly Regulation and Fair Trade Act, but they were riddled with loopholes from the start. After Park Geun-hye's impeachment, Moon Jae-in took office, promising changes for the South Korean people. But Moon never fulfilled his promises. On February 5, 2018, Lee Jae-young's appeal trial took place. His sentence was reduced to 2.5 years, citing insufficient evidence that all the funds were direct conditional bribes. But after just over a year, Lee was released. The story didn't end there. In 2019, South Korea's Supreme Court overturned the appeal, ruling that all the foundation funds were bribes and sent Lee back to prison. However, in the end, on August 12, 2022, President Yoon Suk-yeol announced a special pardon for Lee Jae-young. Lee walked free, resuming full control of Samsung's business and leadership as if nothing had happened. Chaebols were not only untouchable by the law, they sometimes created. In the early 1990s, as South Korea prepared to join the OECD, integration required opening markets and sharing opportunities with international businesses. At this time, chaebols sought to restructure and minimize labor costs to enhance competitiveness. However, South Korea's labor laws at the time didn't allow this. The laws prohibited conglomerates from arbitrarily laying off employees or freely hiring non-regular workers. That is, until the chaebols took action. Leaders of major chaebols met privately with the ministers of labor and economy finance, as well as National Assembly leaders, applying pressure in various ways. Two clear messages were delivered. First, without labor law reform, conglomerates couldn't restructure, and the national economy would collapse sooner or later. On the night of December 26th and 27th, 1996, the government and the ruling New Korea Party secretly passed amendments to the labor and national security laws in just 6 minutes, without opposition or union participation. The chaebols' demands were fully met. The new laws allowed companies to lay off employees more easily, expanded the right to hire non-regular workers, and reduced employee rights during corporate restructuring. After the restructuring, millions of workers became unemployed. The unemployment rate rose from 2 to 3% before 1997 to 8.7% in 1998, the highest in South Korea's history. The proportion of non-regular workers also surged to 35%. The revised labor laws made it nearly impossible for young South Koreans to secure stable jobs. As a result, they lost interest in marriage or having children, contributing to South Korea's world lowest birth rate of 0.72 in 2023. More importantly, this pattern is likely to continue in the future. Right now, if you delve deeper into South Korea's education and culture, you'll uncover a stark truth. Everything sends a message aimed at funneling talent to the chaebols. Indeed, each year, chaebols hold only 1 or 2 recruitment drives. Thousands of top students and workers with exceptional qualifications participate in these exams. They practically prepare their entire lives for that day, the day they achieve true success. Working for small and medium-sized enterprises is synonymous with failure. But is this their personal failure, or the failure of an entire societal system?